Vicious bikers mock a woman on the road. Her unexpected response silences them. The highway stretched endlessly before her, a dark ribbon of asphalt illuminated only by the weak glow of her car's headlights. Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. She wasn't one to scare easily, but something about the empty road unsettled her. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the engine and the faint rustle of the wind outside. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 11:47 p.m. Too late to be driving alone, especially in the middle of nowhere. But Claire had no choice. She had taken the back roads to avoid traffic, and now she was paying the price. Still, she told herself, it was just a road. She'd been through worse. As she drove, she noticed faint lights flickering in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was just another car, but as the lights grew brighter and closer, her unease deepened. Soon, the roar of motorcycle engines shattered the quiet night, and she saw them, at least a dozen bikers riding in formation, their headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. They overtook her quickly, their bikes flanking her small sedan on either side. Claire's pulse quickened as she glanced out her window, locking eyes with one of them. His face was pale and gaunt, his smile twisted and malicious. He raised a hand in a mocking wave, his laughter carried away by the wind. Claire gritted her teeth, her foot hovering over the accelerator. She knew better than to react. The last thing she wanted was to provoke them. The bikers began circling her car, their movements chaotic yet deliberate. One of them revved his engine loudly, the noise rattling through her chest. Another slapped the side of her car with an open palm, the sound like a gunshot in the still night. Claire's heart pounded, but she kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead. They were testing her, she realized, seeing how far they could push her before she snapped. "You've got this, Claire," she whispered to herself, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Just keep driving." But the bikers weren't done. One of them, a tall, wiry man with a face like a skull, pulled ahead and swerved in front of her car, forcing her to slow down. The others closed in behind her, boxing her in. It was a game to them, a cruel display of dominance. Claire's mind raced, calculating her options. She could try to outrun them, but her sedan was no match for their powerful bikes. She could stop and confront them, but that was a gamble she wasn't sure she could win. No, she needed to stay calm, keep her wits about her. There had to be a way out. As if sensing her resolve, the bikers escalated their taunts. One of them, a burly man with a patchy beard, leaned in close to her window and shouted, "What's the matter, sweetheart? Lost your way?" The others roared with laughter, their voices harsh and grating. Claire ignored them, her jaw set in determination. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But then, the skull-faced biker in front of her slammed on his brakes, forcing her to an abrupt stop. Claire's seatbelt bit into her shoulder as her car screeched to a halt, the bikers surrounding her in a tight circle. Their engines idled menacingly, the low rumble filling the air like a growl. Claire's chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing. She glanced around, searching for an opening, but the bikers had her completely boxed in. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. Was this how it ended? Trapped on a desolate road with no one around to help? The skull-faced biker dismounted his bike and approached her car, his boots crunching against the gravel. He tapped on her window with a gloved finger, his smile cold and predatory. "Come on out, darling," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. "We just want to have a little chat." Claire's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct told her to stay put, to lock the doors and wait them out. But something in the biker's tone made her skin crawl. This wasn't just a game to him, it was a hunt, and she was the prey. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. She couldn't show fear. That was what they wanted, what they thrived on. If she was going to get out of this, she needed to act, and fast. With deliberate slowness, Claire reached for the lever on her door and opened it. The bikers hooted and cheered as she stepped out, their laughter ringing in her ears. She stood tall, her posture confident despite the fear coursing through her veins. The skull-faced biker sauntered up to her, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "There she is," he said, spreading his arms theatrically. "What's a pretty thing like you doing out here all alone?" Claire met his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. "I could ask you the same thing." The biker's grin faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, we're just out for a ride. Thought we'd say hello to our new friend." The others laughed, their voices echoing in the night. Claire ignored them, keeping her focus on the leader. He was the key. If she could deal with him, the others might follow. "You've had your fun," she said evenly. "Now let me go." The skull-faced biker chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think you're in a position to be making demands, sweetheart." Claire's eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance flickering in their depths. "You'd be surprised." The biker took a step closer, his smile fading. For the first time, he seemed to sense that Claire wasn't as helpless as she appeared. But before he could react, Claire moved. Her knee shot up, catching him squarely in the stomach. He doubled over with a grunt, the air leaving his lungs in a rush. The bikers froze, their laughter replaced by stunned silence. Claire didn't wait for them to recover. She turned and sprinted toward her car, her heart pounding as she reached for the door handle. But before she could climb inside, another biker lunged at her, grabbing her arm. Without thinking, Claire twisted, driving her elbow into his ribs. He let go with a pained shout, stumbling backward. She didn't stop to see if he would recover. She jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it in one fluid motion. The bikers roared in anger, their engines revving as they closed in. Claire's hands trembled as she started the car, her mind racing. She had to act fast, she wouldn't get another chance. With a deep breath, she shifted into reverse, slamming her foot on the gas. The car shot backward, knocking over one of the bikes as the gang scrambled to get out of the way. Claire didn't hesitate. She shifted into drive and sped forward, the tires screeching as she tore away from the circle. The bikers gave chase, their headlights flashing in her rearview mirror. But Claire didn't look back. Her focus was on the road ahead, her determination unwavering. She had faced them down once, and she would do it again if she had to. For now, though, she was free. The roar of engines behind her was deafening, echoing through the night like a pack of wolves on the hunt. Claire gripped the steering wheel tightly, her foot pressed to the floor as her sedan barreled down the highway. Her heart pounded in her chest, every muscle in her body tense with adrenaline. She could see the bikers in her rearview mirror, their headlights weaving and closing in like predatory eyes. She cursed under her breath. These men weren't going to back off easily. The thought of them catching up filled her with dread, but she forced herself to think clearly. Panic wouldn't help her now. She needed a plan. The highway was desolate, lined with trees that loomed like shadowy sentinels. There were no other cars, no signs of help. Claire scanned the road ahead, searching for anything that might give her an advantage. A turnoff, a bridge, a place to hide, anything. But the stretch of asphalt stretched endlessly into the dark, offering no escape. In the mirror, the bikers were closing the gap. Their engines revved louder, the sound clawing at her nerves. The leader, Skullface she called him, was at the front, his twisted grin visible even from a distance. He raised a hand, signaling to the others, and they began to fan out, their formation tightening around her car. Claire's mind raced. She couldn't outrun them, not in her old sedan, not against bikes built for speed. But maybe she didn't have to outrun them. Maybe she could outthink them. Ahead, the highway curved sharply to the right, disappearing into the trees. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line as an idea began to form. It was risky, but she didn't have any other options. Taking a deep breath, she eased her foot off the accelerator, letting the car slow just enough to make the bikers think she was giving in. The headlights grew brighter in her rearview mirror as they closed the distance, their taunts and jeers faint but audible over the noise of their engines. "Come on, Claire," she muttered to herself. "Timing has to be perfect." The curve in the road loomed closer. At the last possible moment, Claire yanked the wheel to the right, cutting sharply into the turn. The tires screeched in protest, the car shuddering as it barely held onto the asphalt. She could feel the rear end skidding, but she kept her grip firm, correcting the trajectory with a practiced hand. The bikers weren't so lucky. Skullface, too focused on closing the gap, didn't anticipate the sudden maneuver. He swerved hard, his bike tilting dangerously as he fought to stay upright. One of the others wasn't quick enough. His bike skidded out from under him, sending him sprawling across the pavement in a shower of sparks. Claire didn't waste a second. She straightened out of the curve, her car gaining speed as she barreled down the next stretch of highway. In her mirror, she saw the bikers struggling to regroup, their leader shouting orders as they tried to recover. One less biker on her tail, but the others were still in pursuit. The chase continued, the bikers relentless in their pursuit. Claire's mind raced, searching for another advantage. She couldn't keep this up forever. Her car wasn't built for this kind of punishment, and the fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty. She needed to end this, and soon. Up ahead, she spotted a flicker of light through the trees. A gas station. It was small, just a single pump and a dimly lit building, but it was something. More importantly, it was a potential opportunity. Claire glanced at the bikers in her mirror. They were still close, but not close enough to stop her from making her move. She veered off the highway, her tires crunching on gravel as she pulled into the gas station's lot. The place was deserted, the attendant's booth dark and empty. Perfect. She parked her car near the pump, leaving the engine running as she stepped out. The bikers roared into the lot moments later, their headlights bathing her in harsh, artificial light. They surrounded her, their laughter sharp and cruel as they dismounted their bikes. Well, Skullface said, stepping forward. His boots crunched against the gravel as he approached her, his grin widening. Looks like you've run out of road, sweetheart. Claire stood her ground, her posture calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Or maybe you've walked into a trap. The bikers exchanged glances, their laughter faltering. Skullface tilted his head, his grin faltering just slightly. A trap, huh? You really think you can take us all on? Claire didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her car and grabbed a small object, a metal gas can she had spotted near the pump when she pulled in. She held it up, her expression cool and unyielding. You're right, she said, her voice steady. I can't take you all on. But I can take this place with me. She gestured toward the gas pump, her meaning unmistakable. The bikers froze, their bravado suddenly replaced by unease. The threat was clear. One spark, and the entire station would go up in flames. Now, Claire continued, her tone firm, you can turn around and leave. Or we can all see just how flammable this place really is. Your call. For a moment, no one moved. The bikers stared at her, their expressions a mix of anger and uncertainty. Skullface's grin was gone, replaced by a scowl as he weighed his options. He was used to being in control, to having the upper hand. But now, for the first time, he realized he might have underestimated her. Finally, he raised a hand, signaling to the others. Back off, he growled. The bikers hesitated, but they obeyed, stepping away from Claire and their bikes. Skullface glared at her, his eyes burning with hatred. You got lucky, lady. But this ain't over. Claire met his gaze, unflinching. It is for tonight. Now get out of here. One by one, the bikers mounted their bikes and revved their engines. Skullface was the last to leave, his glare lingering on Claire as he turned and rode off into the night. The roar of their engines faded into the distance, leaving Claire standing alone in the empty lot. She waited until she was sure they were gone before lowering the gas can. Her hands were shaking, her knees threatening to give out beneath her. But she forced herself to stay upright, taking deep, steadying breaths. She had won, at least for now. Claire climbed back into her car, her hands still trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. She turned the key, the engine sputtering to life, and pulled back onto the highway. The road stretched ahead of her, dark and empty once more. But this time, the silence felt less oppressive. She had faced down her fear and survived. As she drove, Claire allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't just a target, a victim to be toyed with. She was stronger than they had ever imagined, and she had proved it. Whatever came next, she knew she could handle it. For now, though, she just wanted to get home. The road stretched on, quiet and desolate, but Claire's grip on the steering wheel didn't loosen. Her mind replayed the events of the night over and over, the roar of engines, the flash of headlights, the menacing smirks of the bikers. She had outsmarted them, but the adrenaline still coursed through her veins, refusing to let her relax. She glanced at the fuel gauge. The needle was hovering just above empty. She would need to stop soon, but after what had just happened, the idea of pulling over again sent a shiver down her spine. Up ahead, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. Lights. A town. Relief flooded through her. Whatever this place was, it had to be safer than the dark stretch of highway she was leaving behind. She pressed on, her car sputtering slightly as it climbed the last hill before descending into the town. It was small, the kind of place where everyone probably knew each other. Most of the buildings were dark, their windows reflecting the streetlights that lined the main road. But further down, she spotted a diner, its neon sign flickering but still inviting. The sight of it felt like a lifeline. Claire pulled into the lot and parked her car near the entrance. The engine coughed as she turned it off, and for a moment, she just sat there, her hands still gripping the wheel. She didn't want to get out, but she needed to collect herself, and maybe some food to settle her frayed nerves. Inside, the diner was quiet, with only a handful of patrons scattered across the booths. A waitress glanced up from behind the counter as Claire walked in, her tired eyes widening slightly when she saw Claire's disheveled appearance. "You all right, hon?" the waitress asked, her voice warm but concerned. Claire forced a small smile. "Rough night," she said simply, sliding into a booth near the window. The waitress nodded, not pressing for details. "Coffee?" "Yes, please," Claire said, her voice steadier now. "And maybe a slice of pie, if you have it?" The waitress smiled faintly. "Coming right up." As Claire sipped her coffee, she kept one eye on the road outside. The thought of the bikers returning gnawed at the back of her mind, though she tried to push it aside. She had sent a clear message: they wouldn't dare come after her again. At least, that's what she told herself. Her pie arrived along with a refill of coffee. She thanked the waitress and took a bite, the sweetness momentarily distracting her from the night's events. But as she looked out the window again, movement caught her eye. A motorcycle. Her stomach dropped, but she forced herself to stay calm. It was just one bike, not a gang. Maybe it was just a coincidence. She watched as the rider pulled into the lot, parking a few spaces away from her car. He removed his helmet, revealing a man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face. He didn't look like one of the bikers from earlier, but Claire couldn't be sure. The man walked into the diner, nodding politely to the waitress before taking a seat at the counter. He ordered a coffee, his voice low but even. Claire studied him from the corner of her eye, her body tense. He didn't seem to notice her, or if he did, he wasn't showing it. As the minutes passed, Claire began to relax slightly. The man didn't fit the profile of Skullface or his gang. He was alone, and there was nothing overtly threatening about him. Still, she couldn't shake her wariness. When the man finally glanced her way, his eyes softened with recognition. He nodded toward her. "You were on the highway earlier, weren't you?" Claire's breath caught, but she didn't let her surprise show. "Maybe," she said cautiously. "Why?" "I saw you driving," the man said, his tone neutral. "Saw the gang too. Looked like trouble." Claire's heart raced. "Did you follow them?" The man shook his head. "No. But word travels fast. That crew has a reputation." Claire set down her coffee cup, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Who are they?" "They call themselves the Iron Vultures," the man said. "Mostly small-time trouble, intimidation, petty theft. But they've been getting bolder lately. No one's been able to stand up to them." Claire's jaw tightened. "Until tonight." The man raised an eyebrow, a flicker of respect in his expression. "That was you?" She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "They won't bother me again." "I hope you're right," he said, his voice low. "But the vultures don't like being humiliated. If you cross them, they might come back." Claire's stomach churned, but she refused to let fear take hold. "Then I'll be ready." As the man left the diner, Claire's thoughts swirled. If the Iron Vultures were as notorious as he claimed, it wasn't just about her anymore. They were a threat to anyone who crossed their path. She couldn't let them keep terrorizing people, but confronting them directly would be reckless. She paid her bill and stepped outside, the cool night air biting at her skin. Her car groaned to life as she turned the key, and she pulled out of the lot, heading toward the nearest gas station. She needed to refuel and plan her next move. Claire spent the next day gathering information. The man at the diner had been right about one thing. The vultures had a reputation. They operated out of a roadhouse on the edge of town, using it as both a clubhouse and a base for their activities. The locals avoided the place, speaking of it in hushed tones as though it were cursed. But Claire wasn't afraid of curses. She had faced the vultures once and lived to tell the tale. This time, she was determined to do more than just survive. That evening, she parked her car a safe distance from the roadhouse and approached on foot. The building loomed in the distance, its neon sign flickering weakly. Music and laughter spilled out into the night, mingling with the roar of motorcycles parked outside. Claire kept to the shadows, her heart pounding as she crept closer. She spotted Skullface through one of the windows, his gaunt features unmistakable. He was surrounded by his crew, their faces twisted with cruel laughter as they clinked glasses and exchanged stories. The sight made Claire's blood boil. These men thought they were untouchable, that they could do whatever they wanted without consequence. They were wrong. Claire pulled out her phone and began recording. She captured everything: the bikes, the faces, the interactions. She needed proof, something tangible that could be used against them. As she filmed, she noticed one of the bikers pulling a small bag of something from his jacket and handing it to another man in exchange for cash. Drugs. That was it, the evidence she needed. She slipped away unnoticed, her heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. She didn't know who she could trust in this town, but there had to be someone willing to stand up to the vultures. If she could get the right people involved, maybe, just maybe, she could put an end to their reign of terror. Back in her motel room, Claire uploaded the footage to a secure drive and began making calls. She didn't know where this road would lead, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to let the Iron Vultures win. And this time, she wasn't alone. The footage Claire had recorded was damning, clear evidence of the Iron Vultures' illegal activities, including drug deals, intimidation tactics, and their leader, Skullface, at the center of it all. Sitting in her cramped motel room, she watched the video again, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't take them on alone, but she also couldn't stand by while they continued to terrorize others. She needed help, and fast. Her first call was to the local sheriff's department. The phone rang several times before a gruff voice answered. "Sheriff's office. This is Deputy Harris." Claire took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "Hi, my name is Claire. I need to report a gang operating just outside of town. They call themselves the Iron Vultures." There was a pause, followed by a weary sigh. "Yeah, we're aware of them," Deputy Harris said. "What about it?" "I have video evidence of them dealing drugs and harassing civilians," Claire said firmly. "I recorded it last night outside their roadhouse." Another pause. This time, there was a note of hesitation in the deputy's voice. "Look, ma'am, I appreciate you coming forward, but the vultures are complicated. We've tried to deal with them before, but they've got connections. People who make it hard to bring charges against them." Claire's grip on the phone tightened. "Are you saying you're not going to do anything?" "I'm saying it's not that simple," Deputy Harris said, his tone cautious. "But if you've got evidence, bring it in. We'll take a look." Claire hung up, frustration bubbling inside her. She didn't have time for red tape or bureaucratic excuses. The vultures needed to be stopped now, before they hurt someone else. Claire's second call was to the man she had met at the diner the night before. She had taken a chance and asked for his number as he left, and he had given it to her without hesitation. "Hello?" His voice came through the line, calm and steady. "It's Claire," she said. "The woman from the diner." "Yeah, I remember. What's going on?" "I went to their roadhouse last night," Claire said, her voice low. "I got footage of them dealing drugs. I'm taking it to the sheriff, but I think I'm going to need more help than they're willing to give." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You're brave," the man said finally. "Or reckless?" "Maybe both," Claire admitted. "But I can't let them keep doing this." The man sighed. "All right, meet me at the diner in an hour. We'll talk." When Claire arrived, the man was already there, sitting in the same seat he had occupied the night before. He waved her over, his expression serious. "You've got guts," he said as she slid into the booth across from him. "Most people around here wouldn't dare go up against the vultures. They've been terrorizing people for too long," Claire said. Someone has to stand up to them. He nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Name's Jack, by the way. Claire, she said, shaking his hand. Jack leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. If you're serious about taking them down, you're going to need more than just the sheriff. The Vultures have people on their payroll, cops, business owners, you name it. But there are others who've been hurt by them, people who'd be willing to help if they knew someone was taking a stand. Do you know anyone like that? Claire asked. Jack nodded. A few. There's a mechanic named Rosa. Her shop's been vandalized by the Vultures more times than I can count. And there's a trucker named Pete who had a run-in with them a couple months back. They'd both jump at the chance to fight back. Let's talk to them, Claire said. The more people we have on our side, the better. Over the next 2 days, Claire and Jack worked tirelessly to gather allies. Rosa, the mechanic, was a fiery woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense attitude. She showed them the damage the Vultures had done to her shop: broken windows, slashed tires, and graffiti scrawled across the walls. They think they own this town, Rosa said, her voice dripping with anger. But they don't scare me. If you're taking them on, count me in. Pete, the trucker, was a burly man with a deep, gravelly voice. He told them how the Vultures had stopped him on the highway, demanding money in exchange for letting him pass. When he refused, they had slashed his tires and left him stranded. I've been waiting for someone to take those bastards down, Pete said, clenching his fists. You tell me what you need and I'm there. As word spread, more people came forward. Shop owners, truckers, even a few former bikers who had left the Vultures after disagreements with Skullface. Each had their own story of harassment, violence, or intimidation, and each was eager to see the gang brought to justice. With a growing network of allies, Claire began to formulate a plan. The evidence she had recorded was powerful, but it wasn't enough on its own. They needed to hit the Vultures where it hurt, disrupt their operations, and force them out into the open. We start by cutting off their resources, Claire said during a meeting at Rosa's shop. They rely on fear and intimidation to keep people in line. If we show the town they're not invincible, we can weaken their grip. Jack nodded. What about their drug deals? That's their main source of income. I've already sent copies of the footage to the sheriff, Claire said. If he's willing to act on it, we'll have legal backing. If not, we'll find another way to expose them. Rosa crossed her arms. And what happens when they fight back? You know they will. Then we'll be ready, Claire said, her voice firm. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for this town. The first phase of their plan went into motion the next night. Claire and her group targeted the Vultures' supply chain, intercepting a delivery truck carrying drugs to their roadhouse. Pete used his truck to block the road while Rosa and Jack disabled the vehicle's engine, leaving the driver stranded. Claire recorded the entire operation, ensuring they had evidence to turn over to the authorities. The Vultures were furious. Within hours, Skullface and his gang were out in force, searching for the culprits. But Claire and her allies stayed one step ahead, using the bikers' own tactics against them. They spread false information, leading the Vultures on wild goose chases while they continued to dismantle their operations. As the days turned into weeks, the tide began to turn. The town, once gripped by fear, started to fight back. Shop owners refused to pay the Vultures' protection fees, truckers banded together to defend each other on the highways, and the sheriff's office, emboldened by the community's resistance, launched an investigation into the gang's activities. Skullface was livid. He knew someone was orchestrating the rebellion, but he couldn't figure out who. His frustration boiled over during a meeting at the roadhouse, where he slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "Find them! I want their heads!" But no matter how hard the Vultures tried, they couldn't stop the momentum Claire and her allies had built. The community had found its strength, and they weren't backing down. One evening, as Claire sat in her motel room reviewing the latest footage, she received a call from Jack. "They're planning something big," he said, his voice urgent. "One of my contacts overheard them talking about an ambush. They think if they take out whoever's behind this, they can scare the town back into submission." Claire's heart sank. "Do they know it's us?" "Not yet," Jack said. "But it's only a matter of time." Claire's mind raced. They needed to act fast. The final showdown was coming, and this time, there would be no running. The night was heavy with tension, the kind that seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Claire sat at Rosa's shop with Jack, Pete, and a few others, poring over their hastily assembled plan. The vultures were planning an ambush, but the advantage was now theirs. They knew it was coming. The question was, how would they turn the tables without putting themselves or the town at greater risk? "We need to draw them out," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "They thrive on intimidation and control. If we hit them in their stronghold, it's going to be messy. We need to make them come to us on our terms." Rosa nodded, her arms crossed. "We can't let them dictate the fight. They've been calling the shots for too long." Claire leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "We use their arrogance against them. They think we're weak, just a bunch of nobodies trying to stir up trouble. Let's make them underestimate us, again." Pete scratched his chin thoughtfully. "You're thinking of baiting them?" Claire nodded. "Exactly. We set up somewhere public, somewhere they can't afford to make a scene. When they show up, we make sure the whole town sees who they really are. And we record everything. If they react the way we expect, we'll have all the evidence we need to take them down once and for all." There was a murmur of agreement around the table, but Jack frowned. "That's risky, Claire. If they figure out it's a trap, they won't just back off. They'll come after us harder." Claire met his gaze, her expression resolute. "They're coming after us anyway. We need to show the town that they're not untouchable and that we're not afraid." The plan was set into motion the following evening. The group chose the town square as their battleground, a wide open space surrounded by shops and cafes. It was the heart of the community, a place where people gathered during the day and strolled through on quiet nights. It was also the last place the vultures would expect to find resistance. Claire and Rosa parked their cars at opposite ends of the square, their headlights casting long beams across the cobblestones. Jack and Pete positioned themselves on the rooftops of nearby buildings, armed with cameras and walkie-talkies to coordinate their movements. A few other allies lingered in the shadows, ready to step in if needed. Claire stood in the center of the square, her heart pounding as she waited. She wore her fear like armor, her posture tall and unyielding. The vultures thrived on power, and she knew the only way to beat them was to take that power away. It didn't take long for the sound of engines to shatter the stillness of the night. One by one, the bikers roared into the square, their headlights piercing the darkness. Skullface was at the front, his twisted grin illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. He dismounted his bike and strode toward Claire, his crew fanning out behind him like a pack of wolves. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like someone didn't learn her lesson the first time." Claire held her ground, her expression calm but defiant. "I could say the same to you." The bikers laughed, their voices harsh and grating. Skullface tilted his head, studying her with a mix of amusement and suspicion. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're playing a dangerous game, sweetheart." "This isn't a game," Claire said evenly. "It's over. You've terrorized this town long enough." Skullface's grin widened, but there was no humor in it. "And what are you going to do about it? You think you can stop us?" Claire took a step forward, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I don't have to stop you. You're going to do that yourself." Before Skullface could respond, the sound of a camera shutter echoed through the square. He turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Jack on the rooftop, his camera trained on the group below. "What the hell is this?" Skullface growled. "It's the truth," Claire said, her voice rising. "The whole town is going to see who you really are. They're going to see the drugs, the threats, the violence. And they're not going to stand for it anymore." The bikers shifted uneasily, their confidence faltering as they realized they were being watched. Skullface's grin disappeared, replaced by a snarl of anger. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think a few pictures are going to stop us?" Claire met his glare, unflinching. "I think it's a start." Skullface lunged toward her, but before he could reach her, Rosa stepped out of the shadows, holding a crowbar. "Back off," she warned, her voice cold and steady. "You touch her and you'll have to go through me." The other bikers hesitated, their bravado cracking as they realized they were outnumbered. Pete stepped into the light, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the square. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're not as untouchable as you think." Skullface's gaze darted between Claire, Rosa, and Pete, his fists clenching at his sides. The power dynamic had shifted, and he knew it. But he wasn't ready to back down just yet. "You've made a big mistake," he hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with?" "Neither do you," Claire shot back. "But you're about to find out." The confrontation reached a boiling point as the sound of sirens filled the air. The sheriff's department had finally arrived, their vehicles pulling into the square with lights flashing. Deputy Harris stepped out, his hand resting on the holster of his gun as he surveyed the scene. "What's going on here?" Harris demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. Claire stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I've got video evidence of these men dealing drugs and threatening the town. It's all here." Harris hesitated, glancing at Skullface and his crew. The bikers glared back, their faces a mix of anger and unease. Finally, Harris nodded to his deputies. "Arrest them?" The bikers erupted in protest, but they were no match for the combined forces of the sheriff's department and the town's resistance. One by one, they were cuffed and led away, their bikes impounded as evidence. Skullface was the last to go, his defiant glare fixed on Claire. "This isn't over," he snarled as the deputies hauled him toward a squad car. Claire met his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. "Yes, it is." As the square emptied, the townspeople began to emerge from their homes, their faces filled with a mix of relief and gratitude. Rosa hugged Claire tightly, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it. We all did it." Jack clapped Claire on the shoulder, his smile warm. "You've got more fight in you than anyone I've ever met." Claire smiled faintly, exhaustion finally catching up to her. "I just did what needed to be done." The town had reclaimed its strength, and Claire had found hers in the process. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. And as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, she knew she had made a difference. The sun rose over the quiet town, casting a warm, golden glow over the cobblestone streets. The echoes of the previous night's confrontation lingered in the air, but with each passing moment, a sense of calm began to settle. For the first time in years, the town felt safe. Claire stood in the town square, the morning light accentuating the faint bags under her eyes. She was exhausted but deeply satisfied. Around her, people emerged from their homes and shops, their cautious glances turning to relieved smiles as they realized the Iron Vultures were truly gone. For years, the gang had loomed like a dark cloud over the community, but now, that cloud had lifted. "You're a damn hero," Rosa said, walking up beside Claire and clapping her on the shoulder. "Do you know that?" Claire chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I'm just someone who got tired of running." "Well, whatever you want to call it, you've done something incredible," Rosa said, her voice brimming with admiration. "This town owes you." Claire glanced around at the people gathering in the square. Some were shaking hands with the sheriff's deputies, others were beginning to clean up the remnants of the bikers' chaos. There was an energy in the air, a shared determination to rebuild. "I didn't do it alone," Claire said, her gaze softening as she spotted Jack and Pete helping a shop owner repair a broken window. "It took all of us." Rosa nodded, her expression serious. "Maybe, but someone had to light the fire. And that was you." Over the next few days, the town came together like never before. Claire found herself swept up in the effort, helping wherever she could. She worked alongside Rosa to repair the vandalized walls of the mechanic's shop, painting over the graffiti with bright, cheerful colors. Pete organized a convoy of truckers to transport supplies to the most damaged areas, while Jack coordinated with local business owners to raise funds for the repairs. The sheriff's department, emboldened by the community's support, launched a full-scale investigation into the Vultures' activities. With the evidence Claire had provided, along with testimonies from several brave townspeople, the case against the gang was airtight. Skullface and his crew faced charges ranging from drug trafficking to extortion, ensuring they wouldn't be returning anytime soon. But for Claire, the most rewarding moments were the small ones, the quiet conversations with people who had been living in fear for so long, the tentative smiles of children who could now play outside without worry. She had come to the town as a stranger, but now she felt like she belonged. One afternoon, Claire sat on a bench in the square, watching a group of kids draw chalk murals on the pavement. Their laughter was infectious, filling the air with a joy that had been absent for far too long. Rosa joined her, handing her a cold bottle of water. "You sticking around?" Rosa asked, her tone casual. Claire hesitated, twisting the cap off the bottle. "I'm not sure. I didn't plan to be here this long. I was just passing through." "Well, you've got a place here if you want it," Rosa said, leaning back and crossing her arms. "We could use someone like you." Claire smiled faintly. The thought of staying had crossed her mind more than once, but it felt strange to consider after years of drifting from place to place. "I'll think about it." "You do that," Rosa said with a smirk. "But don't think too long. This town has a way of growing on you." As the days turned into weeks, Claire found herself settling into a rhythm. She took a room above the diner, where the waitress she'd met on her first night always greeted her with a warm smile. She helped Jack organize a community watch program, ensuring the town would never again fall prey to groups like the Vultures. And she spent countless hours talking with Rosa, Pete, and others, learning their stories and sharing pieces of her own. For the first time in years, Claire felt like she had a purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something, helping to create a better future for the people around her. One evening, as Claire walked through the square, she spotted a small crowd gathered near the newly repaired fountain. Curiosity piqued, she approached, weaving her way through the group until she reached the center. There, an elderly woman was handing out candles, her kind eyes twinkling as she explained. "It's a vigil," the woman said, placing a candle in Claire's hand. "For all the people who've suffered over the years, and for those who stood up to make things right." Claire hesitated, the weight of the candle in her hand feeling heavier than it should. She had never been one for ceremonies, but as she looked around at the faces of the townspeople, she realized how much this moment meant to them. As the candles were lit, a soft glow spread across the square, illuminating the hopeful faces of the crowd. The elderly woman stepped forward, her voice strong despite her age. "This town has seen its share of darkness," she began. "But tonight we celebrate the light, the courage, the resilience, and the unity that brought us through. To those who stood up, who fought back, we owe our thanks. And to those who are no longer with us, we honor your memory." The crowd murmured their agreement, some bowing their heads in quiet reflection. Claire stood still, the flickering flame of her candle casting soft shadows across her face. She hadn't sought recognition for what she'd done, but in that moment, she felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. As the vigil ended, people began to disperse, their voices low and reverent. Claire lingered by the fountain, staring into the water as the last of the candles burned down. Rosa joined her, her own candle flickering in the cool evening breeze. "Hell of a night, huh?" Rosa said, her voice light but filled with meaning. Claire nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Yeah, it is." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the past weeks finally beginning to lift. For Claire, it was a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they could go. In the weeks that followed, Claire continued to find her place in the town. She helped organize fundraisers for local schools, worked with Rosa to repair more damage, and even started teaching self-defense classes in the community center. The classes quickly became popular, drawing people of all ages eager to learn how to protect themselves. Through it all, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she had finally found what she'd been searching for. This town, these people, they had become her family. And while she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going anywhere.